Today, we're going to be sharpening a knife with a whetstone. This is the after-work garage. The first step when using whetstones is to get them wet. Now the bubbles we see coming off of these stones are a good sign. That's air being forced out of the voids in the porous stone. Now as water rushes in and air comes out, the whetstones become, as you might imagine, wet. Now water with whetstones serves two primary functions. The first is to lubricate the tool as it's being sharpened on the surface, and the second, and possibly more important function, is to carry away the pieces of abrasive material that rub off of the stone, as well as the minute metal filings that get shaved off during sharpening. Collectively, this is called, I believe, swarf, and it would otherwise build up on top of the stone, making sharpening less effective. So I have two different grits of stone here. This one's going to be a medium grit because this knife really isn't all that dull. And this one's going to be a very fine grit for adding that little bit of polish on there. I'm going to let these soak for a while just to make sure the stone's completely saturated with water. Taking a look at this knife under the microscope, we can see that while the edge looks pretty good to the naked eye, and yes, it's dirty, there's some spots that definitely need attention. Those are going to be these areas right here. And these are damaged areas of the edge that occur with regular use. They become very apparent when I turn the knife vertically here, and you can get a look at how the flat spot on the edge of the knife reflects more light than the metal surrounding it. There's some more areas down here that need attention. And these are going to be what we're going to focus on getting out during a regular sharpening. Now there is a big gouge in the middle, and that's damage that happened a long time ago. That's not going to come out with sharpening today, but it's going to become less apparent over time as the knife wears down with repeated sharpenings. Now that the stones are pretty well saturated and had stopped bubbling, I've pulled it out, just put it on something on a work surface here so the water doesn't go everywhere. It's very important to keep the stone wet at all times when you're working with it because, as I mentioned earlier, water serves to both lubricate and clean the stone as you're sharpening. So the idea here is we're going to want to keep the blade at a fixed angle. Now that angle is going to be determined by how you're sharpening your knife. If you want a knife with a sharper, finer edge, you're going to go a little bit shallower. And if you want a knife with a more durable, yet perhaps slightly less fine edge, you're going to do a more aggressive angle down into the stone. In general, I like to set an angle about like this. Now, I'm not quite sure what that is, if it's about a 30-degree angle or whatnot, but you're going to hold that angle, and the idea is to move in long, consistent motions forward. So as you see the stones drying up a little bit, I'm going to add some water here. So I'm applying pressure to the surface that I'm cutting on. I'm not pushing really hard. I'm really letting the stone do its work. But I am making sure that the edge is making good, consistent contact with the stone. And you can kind of feel, if you get a little too aggressive with the angle, a little too steep, the edge is going to start biting into the stone. And that's a sign that you want to back off a little bit. Now if you get too shallow, you're going to start sharpening parts of the blade that's not the edge, or grinding down on the side of the blade, and that's not helpful either. You want to make sure to follow the contour of your blade. So as the tip comes up here, I'm going to sharpen it. Follow it around like this, but try to keep that consistent angle. Also be very careful when you're sharpening the tip of a knife because they can be very delicate, and just a very little amount of pressure can snap the tip of your blade off. To do the other side, we're simply going to turn the knife over and draw it towards us, trying to maintain that same angle on the other side. There's lots of ways to grind a knife, and I'm not going to go over those here, but this is my everyday pocket knife, and I'm going to try to grind both sides pretty evenly. For example, for a chef's knife cutting vegetables, I'm left-handed, so I want the food to peel away to the left. So I would grind a steeper angle on this side and a flatter angle on this side, so it follows straight down through the food I'm cutting, yet the slice that's being cut off shears off to one side. Should note, if you have a serrated knife with serrations down here, don't sharpen those with this same method. Those will require special sharpening with shaped stones. Also be aware of the corners here. You want to make sure your blade is very flat. If it starts to turn like this, you're going to cut a gouge into the blade with the corner of the stone. And we want to get this blade to a pretty good point with this stone before going on to the next one, because the next stone is very fine, and that's just going to essentially put a polish on there and get that shine and fine edge. In reality, it's probably not necessary for what I use this knife for, but hey, I got it here, so we'll go over it. So you can see up here there were some inconsistent angles. I got a little shallow there and started to grind away on the side of the blade. But that's not going to hurt the edge. That's just more of an aesthetic issue. Alright, let's move on to this finer stone. Since this is much softer than the other one, I'm going to be very careful not to have too aggressive an angle, because I can actually peel layers off of the stone, both damaging it and taking the edge off the knife that we just worked so hard to put on. So same technique, we're going to follow the same angle we used on the other stone and just use a smooth sharpening motion. See, that's exactly what I was trying to avoid right there. So I'm going to take a quick look at that edge, see how I took a big gouge of the stone out. The finer grit stone like this, you're not looking to take off too much material. And if you have big imperfections in your edge, you want to go back to a coarser grit stone rather than work on this forever. Alright, I think I'm pretty happy with that. Let's go take a look at what that edge looks like. So now hopefully we can see that this blade looks a lot nicer. Has a good edge on it. From tip all the way down to the bottom. Except for that gouge there. And we no longer see these shiny spots. So if we look at the edge, it comes to a nice, consistent, sharp point. When we look at the other side, I'd say all in all, I'm quite happy with that. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time on the After Work Garage.